Helvellyn Ridge landing options. What are your choices and what are the risks of flying down the Helvellyn Ridge or up the Helvellyn Ridge if you're starting in Grasmere? The first and most obvious place you could land is you could just land at Clough Head if you started at Clough Head, or you could land at the Grasmere Sports Field if you're in Grasmere. But I'm going to start sort of at the north, I'm assuming that you're going to fly the milk run starting at Clough Head, working your way down. And I'm just going to talk to you about the places that I've landed or I know that people have landed safely and what your choices are. There are many, many reasons why you might want to come and land. So I won't go through all of those. And I won't go through sort of, places that it's particularly rough or what's happening with the sea breeze or whatever. Let's just say you're in the scenario of you're trying to fly the ridge. You decide you want to fly out into the valley and you think, actually, I'm getting a bit low. I need to land. So what are your choices? Well, starting at Clough Head, you can land back top land at Clough Head quite easily. It's very top-landable there on THRELKELD knots or up on the top of the ridge. And generally also, if pilots are flying at Clough Head, there'll be a field in the farm with a windsock in it. And the rule is it's important to pay the farmer there. I think the going rate at the moment is £2 for a pilot. But generally, aim for the field with a windsock in it and you'll be fine. The next sort of normal cross-country bomb-out landing field is at Thirlspot near the King's Head pub. And this is obvious from the air as you come down. There are several fields there that you should be avoiding because they might have trees or power cables or are too small or whatever. There are two obvious fields that are very often used for cross-country landings in an emergency there. And that's a good place to consider landing if you don't have enough height to make the transition round onto the face, the screes of Helvellyn around Brown Cove Crags. It's quite a common place that a ridge run would end early. The next landing field down I want to talk to you about because this is Darren's field. I'm stood in Darren's field. This is named in honour of my friend Darren, who landed here the other day. And this is a seasonal field. This does not exist some of the year. This is, strictly speaking, the lake bed of the reservoir. But pretty much every year, because the whole of the Northwest almost now uses Thirlmere as their principal water supply. And so what happens is if we have a dry period earlier in the year, especially if we have quite a dry May or June or July or something, is the reservoir rapidly retreats from this area at the top. And you're left with, I don't know, an area the size of 10 football fields or something, which is a little bit soft and muddy, shingly in places, and it's been dry long enough that the grass has had time to grow. So in the summer or the spring or even the early autumn, if you are getting low on Helvellyn, this is an option. But it's very important that you know it's an option before you take off, because obviously in the winter, the water would be over my head at this point. So it's a fair weather option. And in fact, I don't know if you can see from here, but the whole of the shoreline of Thirlmere in the summer, after a long period of hot weather, is landable. And that's an important thing for you to know before you take off, probably. So, because then it makes the decisions about whether you come onto the face of Helvellyn different in terms of risk profile, because if there's a relatively safe landing, albeit an emergency one, all the way along the shores of Thirlmere and a very good one at the end, it might change how you think about the risk of transitioning onto the next bit of the slope, but only seasonal here. The next landing is my favourite landing, although there is a jet's risk I want to talk to you about, which is a little hill called Cotra, which is at the sort of southern end of Dunmail Raise. And it's the best place to land on Dunmail Raise because it's very big, it's very soft and grassy. There's very few rocks. It's not particularly boggy. You can and you're away from the worst bit of the Venturi in Dunmail Raise. So as a bomb out option, it's a good option. It's all year round for that site as a landing field in Dunmail Raise, whereas this obviously is summer only. But you need to be aware that military jets use Dunmail Raise as a transition point to get between the southern fells and the northern fells. It's one of the training routes that military jets use for low-level flying, and generally they come through Dunmail Raise at about 500 feet above ground level. But if they're helicopters, they might be all the way down to the ground, and I've seen them higher sometimes too. So if you don't have a NOTAM, you need to think quite hard about that, especially in the week and especially during the day, midweek. So before 5 or 6 o'clock at night, something like that. So that's the risk in Dunmail Raise. As you go past Dunmail Raise into the Grasmere Valley, then the next good landing field is a field opposite the Travellers' Rest pub. That has a public right-of-way running down the edge of it and is shaped sort of like a big triangle or trapezoid shape. You can see it quite easily from the air. It's next to a bus stop on the A591 that will take you back to sort of where the road divides to go up to St John's in the Vale. It's a good place for retrieves. And it's a good option if you don't quite have the lift or the reach to get through to Grasmere Sports Field or beyond to Ambleside. So I try and encourage pilots not just to land willy-nilly in any field in Grasmere. The farmers aren't keen on that particularly. It's better where there's a farming business that's active if you can try and stick to fields that have public rights of way. And there's a public right of way in that field down the edge. There is one hazard in the field to talk about. Well, two. There's trees at the northern end that you should avoid. And there's a telegraph pole on the roadside next to the A591, which you need to steer clear of. If you come well into the field properly, you'll avoid it. You can see it from the air. The next landing field is the Grasmere Sports Field. Hopefully, everyone will be familiar with that. You can find that on an Ordnance Survey map really easily. The hazard with that is there are some fences that bisect the Grasmere Sports Field itself. And also, although it's a very big field, it's 14 acres, there are sometimes large events on the field. There are alternative fields to the north, what we call the Accuracy Field, which also has this huge public right-of-way running down the middle of it. And that's another emergency option if the Grasmere Sports Field is full. But generally, most of the year, you can land on Grasmere Sports Field, and it's a lovely, big, safe, inviting field where you're not going to be disturbing any livestock or anything like that. Beyond that, the milk run properly, I think traditionally would go at least to Ambleside. And some people obviously have flown the milk run, got to Ambleside, and then gone all the way to Kendal or all sorts of places. So I'm just going to stop at Ambleside if that's all right. But Ambleside, there are a few options. Probably most famously the cricket pitch at Ambleside, because again, it's not going to have livestock in. It's pretty big and empty most of the time. And there's no hazards really on the pitch itself most of the year. So that's a good, safe option. The next other one along would probably be Ambleside Park, where there's big open fields, and again, generally no livestock. So those are two good, and then you might even be able to get as far as the rugby pitch, possibly in Ambleside. But those three, the cricket pitch, the park, and then the rugby pitch, all kind of in a line. So with maybe a few miles between them. So you've got quite a lot of choice by the time you get there. And that's it. Some general rules. It's really helpful to find out from someone, if it's a good day for the Clough Head option, so starting at Clough and coming south, there will be some pilots on the hill who've had to drive up the A591 past all of these landing sites before they got to the hill. And so it would be a good idea to ask them, what's the reservoir looking like? Is there anyone in Grasmere Sportsfield today? We've got Telegram groups for talking to each other about these things. Try and use the groups and try and find out what your landing options are before you take off. But there are really quite a lot of options, especially in the summer. Although you just need to be aware of those hazards that potentially might crop up. But at the Lakes Charity Classic itself, generally, Richard Bungay puts an airspace coordination in, and we have a really good idea of the other traffic that's transiting through the airspace here. So at the LCC, there's a little bit more effort that's put into the safety and deconfliction. So we do a little bit more for deconfliction with other aircraft and so on. But if you're flying here on your own, it's worth just doing a bit of research about the landing fields and seeing how far you get.